What we want to do is reflect on some of the things that we talked about and also kind of think about our investments in infrastructure and the plans and strategies that we've been working on. So please, Paul Anderson with Port Tampa Bay, Ananth Prasad, the President-Designate of Florida Transportation Builders Association, Gina Evans with the Tampa International Airport, and Julie Shernow with Brightline. Come on up, and I'll start asking you some questions. And here's why it's so darn important that they're joining us here, because here's what I captured. There was a great reporter speaking. She used pictures and terminology that was fun. I captured that the couch cushions do not have enough money in them, the skull and crossbones are bad, and that their Congress actually passed something that was called a Lust Fund. In case you missed it, it was the leaky uses storage.
Underground storage.
It was leaking underground storage.
Really, all I caught was lust. I'm sorry. It was like, can really Congress not have some sign of sensitivity?
It was in the 1990 Oil Pollution Act. See, I do know policy occasionally.
So let's get this back on track. What did you just hear? I mean, Paul, you obviously work with Elaine a lot of times, and your focus not only for Port Tampa Bay, but you've been a state and a national leader in terms of transportation and freight and goods. Give me your feedback on what you just mentioned. And I'm going to ask all of you to reflect a little bit on what Elaine said, and then we'll go into other questions. So thank you.
Well, first, I think we're fortunate to be in Florida. And really it starts with leadership. Governor Scott, under his 8 years, and having a great Secretary of Transportation, Ananth Prasad, invested in not just, I'd love to say, which they did, $3 billion of unprecedented historical growth in our 14 seaports, but they made the investments in strategy, in planning, in intermodal, last mile, freight connectivity, and you saw up there, Elaine showed that we're ranked as C, but I think we're better in many ways than that C grade deserves. Money is the key obstacle in Congress. As Elaine mentioned, every time they authorize a new project, you have to do an offset. So you have to go find a way to cut something else as a member of Congress. You can have the best idea, everybody can agree on it, but under the rules in the Senate and the House, you have to offset to create new funding. And it's really a barrier for strategic investment in our nation's infrastructure. It's going to be extremely difficult as a nation to get off that D. I remember when I served for then Chairman Mica. Congressman Mica was chairman of the Transportation. I was a senior fellow on the committee. And that Engineers, Association of Engineers was the Bible. I mean, it went through and did an in-depth every, I think, 2 years. And that was all over the Transportation Committee offices because we're behind other nations. But Florida, I believe, is much better than that C grade, and I know Ananth can speak to that, but on the aviation side, we have great airports, great rail, and it's getting better. So my concern, though, for the long term is how those grants that Elaine talked about, particularly the build and that we're in infra, that we be able to capture those. Those are competitive grants. And I think Florida's done pretty well with those. I think we can do better. But the long-term issue is going to be investment in our infrastructure. I think DOT's budget, Secretary, was $10 billion, going on $11 billion. So we're right up there, top 3 in the nation. But it's all about money, vision, and strategy and how you invest it.
So Paul's done a great job to cue it up. Instead of going straight down the line, do you mind if I jump to Ananth Prasad? Because in case it's lost on you, we don't have another Ananth Prasad in the state. This is the former Secretary of the Department of Transportation in Florida. And Ananth, reflect on what Elaine said and some of the things that Paul just mentioned. So.
Well, I think Elaine's presentation really hits it on the federal level. I think it's projected about a $100 billion shortfall for the next reauthorization that's coming up next fall. I do see hope, though, that there are Senator Cornyn from Texas is working on a bill that's morphed into some multiple iterations, and I know his staff's been working with the IRS and other federal agencies on how to collect revenue. So I do believe that there is a model that you'll hear early next year that seems to gain a lot of support, not only from the trucking industry, from all the businesses. So at the federal level, I think that's the hope. We need to invest in the federal level. I think at the state level, I'll throw a couple of things for you. I think at the state population-wise, I think we're growing 2%. DOT budget's grown about 1.4, 1.5%, while the vehicle miles traveled in the state has grown over 3%. So, I think one of the things at the cusp of a new governor, new administration coming in, is that we've got to figure out a way to continue to keep pace with the growth, right? Population growth, vehicle miles traveled, and I think that's a key challenge. I think President Galvano really challenged the chamber and Mark and Dave about trying to come up with some recommendations on how we do that. And President-elect, I think I'll give kudos to him about his transition team. Historically, the transition teams are organized in the silos of transportation, highway safety, but the transition team is more organized in a much broader silo called economy.
Right.
And I think that's a very interesting nuance in the sense that the governor-elect recognizing that a lot of these things fit in the broader context of growing our economy. So a couple of challenges on the horizon that you do want to, we heard about fuel efficiency. The last revenue estimating conference reduced revenues for Florida DOT to the tune of $100 million a year in the outer years. So if you take the 5-year work program, the revenue estimating conference reduced revenues to the tune of $500 million over a 5-year period. Now, $500 million amounts to about $1 billion and $1.5 billion worth of commitments and projects. So while we're growing 800, 900 people a day, while we're driving more fuel-efficient vehicles, and what's going to happen with the onslaught of electric vehicles, I think we do have an issue. While we're very well funded in the state of Florida, I think there are some indicators that we need to diversify that revenue source and try to position ourselves to be the best state.
Thank you. Gina, I'm going to come to you next, but let me make 2 announcements first. The first, if you want to send me some questions that you want to ask, I want to remind you that the cell phone polling tool, the address that you have, there's also an ability to submit questions, and if we can't get to it during the panel or during any of the upcoming presentations, we'll get back to it sometime during the day, and you can see the responses there. The second thing is you may notice that it says Alice Ancona, our Director of International Programs for the Florida Chamber Foundation, would normally be up here. Unfortunately, life gets in the way, and that makes 2 different things that I want to announce. She'll normally be working with us on many of the international projects. She had to stay home. She just came back from a very successful international trade missions. And then the realities of being a mom struck and her son got sick. But fortunately, everything's very good. The second announcement about life is we need a Tesla converter because obviously a gas can is not going to help Ann out. If you've got a Tesla converter, we need to actually power up her vehicle. Sorry to do that, but that's life in the modern age. So Gina, let's switch to and continue the conversation about reflecting on Elaine. You know, moving people and or passengers and freight is a big part of air life as well. Gina, as I mentioned, is with the Tampa International Airport. What are your thoughts on what was reflected there?
Well, I think that a couple of things that it's always great to hear that people at the federal level are hearing the same things, that when you hear them from different people, that always confirms that maybe something can happen. Yes, Florida is very fortunate, and Secretary Prasad started with us on our 3 phases of master plan that we just finished earlier this year and spending $1 billion. And we were very grateful for his $194 million investment. Piece of paper still underneath my desk. And as we move forward, that while, yes, our counterparts throughout the country are very envious of Florida's commitment to infrastructure and specifically on the aviation side, other states don't have that. And Florida is unique in that we have 4 large hub airports. We're the only state with 4 large hub airports. Texas only has 2, California only has 2, we have 4. So that speaks to the importance of aviation to the state of Florida. We're the birthplace of commercial aviation. Florida, we have the Space Coast, all of these things, and how do you continue that? One of the pieces at the federal level that has been discussed for several years is a passenger facility charge. It's a user fee that is on your airline ticket, and it's $4.50. It has not been raised since the year 2000. We were successful with the Republicans in the Senate of getting it raised by $2 last year. Unfortunately, the House Transportation Committee did not agree, but we hope that that is one of the first things that incoming Chair DeFazio will look at. And what that fee does, it is only for capacity, safety, and security projects. And that would mean that we can continue to expand and grow without having to take out more revenue-based back bonds. With the passenger facility charge, it stays local. That $4.50 does not go to Washington, D.C. It stays in Tampa and only can be for those specific areas at our airports. And so we're hopeful that that'll be one of the first, we've been hearing that that's one of the first things that Chairman DeFazio wants to do. And with that, I think that we can do a lot. And in exchange for that, the large hub airports that would be using that, we would give up our grant funding. So when you talk about this shortage of grants and the overscheduling and everything, when the large hub airports say, we don't want your grants, we'll give us the flexibility to control our own destiny. That with the incoming governor-elect, who has been great on all of these issues so far as these transition teams are going, that we can ensure for the aviation side a very secure future for Florida as we all continue to grow.
So our next presenter is actually Julie Shernow with Brightline. And now Brightline's a private investment. You're
Yes.
trying to solve different gaps. These issues, obviously, that Elaine talked about impact you, but you've got a different perspective. Your thoughts on her presentation? Or tell us a little bit about Brightline generally.
Sure. So we are the only privately funded, owned, and operated express intercity train service in the United States. So a little different than what we're talking about here. And I can talk about passenger rail instead of freight. But really what I wanted to just address is a lot of things that we talked about earlier that Mark and Tony talked about is that we are growing at a rapid pace. We can only build out our roads and infrastructure to a certain point. So we've got to look at other modes of transportation. And the top, I think it was 8 markets or counties that are going to be expanding in the next, call it, 10, 15 years are all along our corridor. So we're going to be moving everybody along our existing corridor between West Palm and Miami, but as we have future expansion to Orlando and to Tampa, it's really important that we focus on passenger rail and making sure that we connect with, the airports, the ports, the different rideshare companies to make sure that we actually have this mobile opportunity to get through our state that's expanding, like I said, at a rapid pace. So, I can't really speak to freight or federal funding, but if you have any questions about Brightline and Virgin, happy to answer.
Sounds good. Anand?
Yeah, I think for people in this room need to be focused on what Brightline or Virgin Rail is doing. It's truly a game changer. If you think about it, within the next couple of years of getting the train to Orlando and over the next maybe 5 years to getting to Tampa, the prospect of connecting 5 of our biggest metros in some other mode than highways is totally remarkable. And Governor Bush first had the high-speed rail, the constitutional amendment that he had to kill it. Obviously, my boss, Governor Scott, gave away the $2.4 billion. Here's a private enterprise that's delivering a choice at no cost to the taxpayers. Is truly something as chamber, as business, as transportation advocates have to be rally around and support, because who would have thought 80 years ago that we would have an intercity passenger rail as an available choice. So kudos to you.
Yes.
So the next few questions will go in whatever order you'd like. I just want to reflect on a few things that we talked about before, and I do want to thank the person who did send the next question I'll ask, because it did come through the polling device. So there's, we've been talking about the population growth between here and 2030, and it provides opportunities and needs for transit for people. It provides needs for more goods. It opens the door for making more, moving more, multiplying the impacts of those things. But I think it's a great question. Will all the new residents have the will to fund our infrastructure challenges? And that's almost in direct conflict with the needs or the lack of funds that are coming ahead. What do you think? Are Floridians thinking about the opportunities for tomorrow?
Well, I'll start. I think it's the politicians that need to get on the message, because I think last election, 79% of the ballot initiatives in the country passed when it comes to transportation. I think Florida, all ballot initiatives relating to transportation passed overwhelmingly. So that tells you the voters are interested, are willing to pay more for better infrastructure. I think we just need to reconcile that sentiment to our elected officials to say that, hey, I think Floridians are willing to pay. The distinction between taxes and fees, I think what passenger facility charges you talked about, Gina, is, if you use the airport, you pay for it. If you don't use it, you don't pay for it. So user fees are more appropriate, and I think Florida needs to continue to look at it. You can see Hillsborough County, just north of us, passed their ballot initiative. So there's appetite at voter level. It's the challenge is that it's not being translated to the capitals in our states.
I would also say that, the leadership is always the most critical part of the process. Ananth just mentioned Hillsborough overwhelmingly, after it failed 2 previous attempts to add a penny sales tax for transportation needs, exclusively for transportation, which puts Hillsborough, of all 67 Florida counties, the highest. I think it's 8.5%.
Right.
So the people are willing to tax themselves. You also see this on some of the polling when it comes to, Elaine was talking about the use tax. And that's really important, because we're going to get demand destruction on fuel consumption as we get these more, as we're demoing these electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles and Uber and the Gen X, and they're not going to use cars. So we're going to see demand destruction. And demand, what that means, it's permanent. It doesn't come back. And the gas tax receipts are going to continue to decline. But I think the strategy is the same when you talk about population growth, whether it's cargo infrastructure, moving freight, as it is moving people. Because we have 21 million residents. We're scheduled to grow by 5 million by 2030. And I know the chamber uses 1,000 a day. We're using 1,100 a day. It's a lot of people moving into our state. And moving the consumer goods into that, our strategy at Port Tampa Bay was aligning our message to serve the I-4 corridor. And almost 10 million people, 70 million visitors last year. That's the other part of the equation. We had 120 million people come last year. They're getting rental cars. They're flying in on planes. They're going to use the train. It's going to be phenomenally successful. We can't wait for it to come to Tampa. There is so much opportunity. But on the freight side, you have also e-commerce strategy. Let me tell you, Walmart, Amazon, they've got multi-million square foot. They don't want to be 150 miles away from the market they're serving. They want to be right next door. So all these things have to come into play.
Gina, you had a comment that you were going to make, do you remember?
Actually, Paul just took it. I was going to say we have the highest sales tax in the state of Florida now, and it wasn't just, it was a penny and a half. It was a penny for transportation and a half a cent for school
Education.
infrastructure. Absolutely. I think that the voters of Hillsborough County said that very loud, that we were willing to tax ourselves on that. And to the Secretary's point, yes, with the airport, with the passenger facility charge of talking about user fees, right now, if you do not come to the Tampa International Airport, you're not paying for it. We do not use our ad valorem taxes. We are very self-sufficient on our own funds. And so, and again, even if you come through and you never buy a cup of coffee or you don't do anything else, you're paying $4.50 to contribute for us to be able to expand that infrastructure by adding that. We started this project at the right time. We added 55,000 square feet to the main terminal. I don't know what our airport would look like had we not done this and started the project when we did. We had record passenger numbers last year, and in order to keep up with that, in order for visitors to keep coming back, they need to have good experiences. And then also the business community. I know with Copa Airlines, that's huge for you with the expansion of the Panama Canal. In order to keep doing that, the Copa is based in Panama, and obviously it's been great for the port, and it's been a great relationship they were huge in helping us get Copa. So it's how do you keep those conversations going on the business community side as well.
And let me just touch base on one thing you said. There was a lot of opposition in our community about what Joe Lopano, my counterpart at the airport, his strategic vision, and thank you, Secretary, for supporting it. There was opposition to how much was being spent, and it took bold leadership. It comes down to leadership. It took the governor to support it. It took the secretary and his team to support it after Joe proposed this big, bold vision plan. And thank God we did, because as Gina said, and we have one of the best airports in the country before, during, and after.
Now, you're both from Tampa, and that's just coincidence at this time. I appreciate both of you lending, but the story is pretty similar as we go around the state, whether we're talking from the southern to the northeast corridor, northwest corridor, and even here in Southwest. So very interesting stories. Another question that just came in from the audience, they're actually fantastic questions, so I'm going to throw this, and then I do want to close with some questions about the next moving passengers, trade and logistics, services, what the globe's going to need in terms of those items. But here's the question that they asked. We're adding 5 million more residents to Florida, plus 150 million plus visitors per year by the time we get to 2030. What are we doing to minimize the impact, the mobility impact of all that's going on? You know, I know that you all are investing smartly to protect not just the property that you have, because you're to some spaces land bound in what you're capable of doing, but you're also doing much more for the sustainability and the resilience questions. Anybody want to tackle that? All right, what are you doing to mitigate the mobility impacts?
Well, I think from the airport perspective, Fort Lauderdale Airport was the fastest growing airport in the country last year, #1. And you know, Jeff and I were just talking about how they're growing, and we're all growing, that the FAA mandates that airports have master plans that show how you are going to sustain this growth for 20 years. And I think from the aviation side, you look at what Orlando's doing, you look at what we're doing, you look at what Fort Lauderdale's doing, you look at what, Jeff, you guys just redid your master plan as well. And there's so many of us that are looking at what is that strategic growth. But the conversation goes, how can you afford it? And when we're looking at $3 billion worth of capital needs, and $1.1 billion of it is PFC eligible, but we only have $269 million of capacity, it comes to, you can have the greatest plan in the world. If you don't have the financing tools to do it, you're just beating your head up against the wall with it.
Well, you know, talk about resiliency and climate change. I think, you know, we've gone through the last few years quite a few storms, and the transportation infrastructure actually has performed very well. Yeah. You know, when Hurricane Andrew came, we didn't have signs standing upright. We had lights down. You know, obviously the Pensacola Bay Bridge getting floated away. We've had quite a few storms, you know, the last few years, and you know, with the exception of US 98, but there's not a whole lot you can do on US 98. Our infrastructure has survived very well. So that's a testament to continued focus on resiliency and trying to address that. The mobility challenge is going to be, you know, 5 more million by 2030. What's that? 170 million tourists, right? I gave the example last week when I first started in DOT in 1991. We were talking about a road called Brandonfield-Chafee Road, and I know RSNH folks will know that. It's now called the First Coast Expressway. And that's 1990, and we're still finished. We still got 2 more segments of First Coast Expressway to be built, and that's, you know, 28 years. So 12 years on an infrastructure horizon is a very short time frame. And I think one of the recommendations to the Chamber's Infrastructure Council, and I know Beth Keagle's participated, Rob Palmer, and others, is to really, I think we need to create a vision of a long-term sustainable, and I got to look my notes there, Beth, of intermodal multi-purpose corridors. I think it's just not moving cars or moving freight, but can we look at some future corridors that provides that broadband connectivity to rural areas, that provides some resiliency in electric grid system or our natural gas, right? And maybe include potential for a freight corridor so that Tampa Bay can ship stuff up rather than having to go through the middle part of the state. So I think we need to think about that, because our current corridors are already maxed out. You can't build your way out of congestion, and unless we're going to build a different kind of wall in Florida, people are going to come here.
I would just say, just on to that note, we've are experiencing the congestion and the traffic, and to your point, we can't expand any further. So just in terms of Brightline, there's 500 million trips that are done between Orlando and Miami. The crazy thing is that 95% of those trips are done in private cars. So that kind of, you can understand why we have so much traffic and congestion. So the more people that we can take off the road, and we hope to take about 3 million people off the road between Orlando and Miami, we've got to figure out, and we've got to change habits ultimately of how people are getting around today. I'm coming from New York, and we've got different ways of getting around, and we've surpassed New York. So we've got to also change habits. That's the other thing, of making sure that you guys have what you need, but also maybe go a little bit out of your way to save some time, save some money potentially. So I think also it's changing the habits and getting people prepared of really what's going to happen.
And I think technology is going to be the enabler. I
Yep.
think you're seeing that connectivity. I think habits are, tough to break.
Yep.
But I think technology is enabling for us to, get groceries shipped, or even Uber Eats or Bite Squads, and I think technology will be, and I think from a regulatory standpoint, one of the conversations with the transition team, with the governor-elect, is we've got to go to a regulatory framework that facilitates technology adoption rather than fighting. You saw the Uber Mears deal a couple of months ago. I kidded with some folks that how would that deal look like about 4 years ago, And, so technology adoption is at a much faster pace. I think it's going to help us with the connectivity from getting into a car to a rail to potentially a ride share. And we need to enable those technologies to flourish, get implemented, rather than creating barriers, because we want to protect some 19th century concept. Mindset.
All right, so last question. This will be a 30-second speed round. We'll start with you, Gina. Go this way. I'll answer it first so you have time to think, and I'll tell you what the question is. Don't worry. And then we'll end with you, Ananth. If you have one piece of advice or one thing that we need to plan more smartly or to share with the transition team, what would you want us to be doing right now, or what would you share? I'll start, like I said, because that'll give each of you. You saw Paul Anderson going through his notes because he was wondering if I was ever going to ask the questions that we said we might ask, and no, we're not. We're just going to talk about great things. So here's my idea. Over the last decade, we have been guided by the trade and logistics reports that were talking really spurred on originally by the Panama Canal expansion and the things that were going to be opening up throughout that whole process. But the world is changing radically, not only in terms of trade and goods and the way that technology is enabling those changes. I think we need another look at trade and logistics. I think our mantra is still the same. It is still move more, make more, multiply the impacts, but it's now slightly different. It's beyond that. So I think that hopefully we'll find some people here that are interested in the next trade and logistics report, and if that's you, just let us know. So Gina, you got it?
Well, I think that, we did have a great 8 years under Governor Scott, and, starting with Secretary Prasad and going through Secretary Dew, and to not lose that momentum. I think that there has been record investment in the infrastructure, and that we don't want to lose this momentum going forward as we move forward to meet the future needs. And I think that also includes not just what we're doing for the investment in infrastructure, but to make sure that we're investing in workforce training, to make sure that we have the workforce to finish these projects and to complete these things. Because again, it's you've got this great plan, but if you don't have the financing and the workforce and all these other pieces, all you have is a great plan.
Thanks. Julie, anything?
I agree. The momentum. I mean, I've seen a lot that has changed and has evolved, and I think that it's important that we keep that trajectory going up. Keep it short and simple.
That's awesome. Paul, anything?
Yeah, I think mentioned it twice. Leadership and having bold, decisive leadership on where we're going to go is really important. The other, Ananth just mentioned it, embracing technology in all all sectors. And I grabbed my phone, and my kids can operate this better than I can. And 10 years ago, no kids had phones. And since the 10 years of the iPhone, the world has changed faster than it's ever changed. And it'll never change that slowly ever again. So we have to embrace technology.
I wanted to end with you because I really want to highlight you're also the chair of our Infrastructure Coalition, and I appreciate the guidance that you're already giving us and love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I would just say unrelentless pursuit of innovation, because I think that's and technology, I think that's what's going to bridge it for us. I think a trade and logistics, the next chapter would be worthwhile, but a huge basis of that should be how we embrace technology in trade and logistics, because I think that's going to happen regardless.
Thank you so much. In a second, I'll ask you to join me in thanking them for participating, but I'm getting a signal on my clock up here that we have 7 minutes and 38 seconds to take a break, stretch, go get some water, go to the restrooms, and come on back. Before you leave, though, please join me in thanking our panelists for their conversation.